Manhattan prosecutors who succeeded in convicting Donald Trump on 34 felony counts are not giving up the fight to seek accountability someday. Now, Trump's attorneys want the DA's office to agree that its entire criminal case should be dismissed now that Trump is president-elect and in the wake of the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity. Today, the DA's office rebuffed that request. But given the unprecedented nature of this case, prosecutors also signaled a willingness to put Trump's sentencing on hold while Trump is in office. The decision to freeze or dismiss the case altogether will be up to Judge Juan Merchan, who's expected to say something on the matter in the days ahead. Joining me now is Duncan Levin, former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York. Duncan, it's been a minute. A lot has changed, sir.
Yes.
First off, why do you think Bragg's office is opening the door to delaying this for 4 years?
Well, there are some unpalatable choices for this judge. He could dismiss the case. He could decide to throw the president-elect of the United States in jail right now. Both of those are extremely unlikely to happen. So he really has two bad choices. One is to sentence the president-elect of the United States to time served and say all of this basically was for nothing. And the other is to say, I'm going to sentence him, but in a way that balances these constitutional norms of respect for the presidency and respect for the jury system, kick it down the road 4 more years until he's done, and then sentence him. If the judge has it in his mind that he should go to jail, he could do it in 4 years. He won't interfere with the presidency at all. So Alvin Bragg is clearly going to be asking for jail time if it's put 4 years in the future. Right now, there's no choice. I mean, the only sentence available is what's called a unconditional discharge, which means that's it. The case is done. He has felony conviction, and that's it.
And we're done here. I guess I'm reading between the lines here, and it sounds like you believe that Merchan, if he kicks the can down the proverbial road by necessity, it's because he has something in mind for Trump that's quite serious in terms of a sentence.
I think that the pathway to incarceration is still there. It's narrowed, but there's also another reason,
In a post-presidency.
In a post-presidency. But there's also another reason, which is anything could happen in the next 4 years.
Sure.
Trump may or may not be alive. The judge may or may not be. Anything could happen. And so really, by kicking the can down the road for 4 years, he preserves a lot of options. It gives him a chance to rule on these motions in a way that's not really time pressured. He can make the right decision, because all of this is, without, to say the least, is without legal precedent. So he wants to try to get it right, and there's really no rush anymore.
Well, yeah, and we're seeing a lot of cans either be kicked down the road or thrown into the recycling bin outright, right?
Yeah.
And to that end, today, the Georgia Court of Appeals canceled oral arguments that were scheduled for December 5th about whether Fani Willis, the Fulton County DA, should be disqualified from the election interference case she brought against Trump. This has to do with the whole kerfuffle with Nathan Wade. They canceled the hearing. They canceled the oral arguments. What does that say to you about what's going on with this case?
There are bigger issues at stake here than this sort of sideshow about the prosecutors and disqualification. Trump was losing those arguments prior to the election. I think now they're probably reevaluating the whole case, whether it can go forward. They're dealing with all the same constitutional issues that this New York court is dealing with. And so in a way, they're just canceling it, saying, this is a sideshow right now. We have to actually get to the meat of the issue, which is, can this prosecution even go forward? It doesn't even matter who the prosecutor is. Can any state prosecution right now go forward against the president-elect? And so I think the reason they canceled it without any comment is that this is just a minor sideshow at this point with sort of bigger problems.
Is your assumption that that case goes away?
I think that the 2 federal cases are dead on arrival, obviously, and I think the other 2 are sort of withering away slowly. And there are pathways to a conviction in Georgia. There's pathway to incarceration in New York, but it's narrowing. It's sort of dying on the vine. And so I think that it's going to be tortured. And if it survives, it will be only because it survives a very tortured process. This has given Trump's lawyers so much to argue in the state courts about balancing these constitutional norms and how a case like this goes forward, that it might be years before anything ever really happens on either of these 2 state cases.
In the meantime, though, you know, his allies are still being prosecuted in at least 4 states, Rudy Giuliani and Mark Meadows, Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, and Nevada. So there's some accountability for some people who are affiliated with the plot to sway an election. Duncan Levin, the screw turns, as they say. These are the days of our lives. Thank you for making the time, my friend. It's one hallmark of the Trump era, one strategy that has been employed to force through a radical agenda. It might be this one, first articulated by Steve Bannon all the way back in 2018. The Democrats don't matter, Bannon said. The real opposition is the media. And the way to deal with them is to flood the zone with stuff. He didn't say stuff, but you get the idea. Now, Steve Bannon was overstating the role of the media and understating the role of actual Democratic officials, but that flood the zone approach, that is something we have seen Trump do to great effect over the years. It's not that Trump is some kind of brilliant tactician, but on some level, Trump does seem to realize that the best way to avoid scrutiny is to simply do a whole lot of bad things all at once to keep everyone's attention divided. Something that we are seeing play out right now, today, this hour. Today, Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace introduced a bill that would ban transgender people on Capitol Hill from using the bathroom of the gender they identify with. It's clear that this bill was designed to stoke controversy about Congresswoman-elect Sarah McBride, who became the first openly transgender person ever elected to Congress in this past election. Under Mace's bill, Congresswoman-elect McBride would be forced to use the men's room on Capitol Hill. It's an obviously dehumanizing attempt to bully a new member of Congress. It's a clear attempt to gain the spotlight, given the fact that Representative Mace just 3 years ago co-sponsored a bill that would have protected transgender people from exactly this kind of discrimination. And here is what she says now.
Is this effort in response to Congresswoman McBride's coming to Congress?
Yes, and absolutely. And if McBride wants to go to the gym, she can go to Planet Fitness, where they allow biological men to be around and in a room in a private space with underage girls. Like, no, thank you. It's not going to happen, not on my watch.
The irony here is that if there are any alleged or accused sexual predators coming to town in January 2025, they may be 2 of Trump's own cabinet picks. Matt Gaetz and Pete Hegseth are both currently fighting allegations of sexual misconduct, allegations that both men deny. But Nancy Mace is worried about transgender people using her bathroom. This is literally what it means to flood the zones. We are now talking about Nancy Mace and transgender panic, and not, say, the unfitness of Trump's cabinet picks and the very real threats they pose to the agencies they are set to lead. For example, today, The Bulwark unearthed video from 2020 of RFK Jr., Trump's pick to lead the Health and Human Services Agency, suggesting that he is open to the idea that the global coronavirus pandemic was actually a sinister government conspiracy.
Many people argue that this pandemic was a plandemic, that it was planned from the outset, that it's part of a sinister scheme. I can't tell you the answer to that. I don't have enough evidence.
Just to be clear, the pandemic that caused the deaths of more than 1 million people in the United States, the COVID pandemic, was not planned by the U.S. government. Here's another example. A few hours ago, Trump named Dr. Mehmet Oz, the failed Pennsylvania Senate candidate and former TV doctor, to run the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Prior to joining Trump's orbit, Dr. Oz already had a reputation as a snake oil salesman. It's something then Senator Claire McCaskill pressed him on during a 2014 Senate hearing.
Why would you say that something is a miracle in a bottle?
My job, I feel, on the show is to be a cheerleader for the audience.
Years later, Dr. Oz went on to use his platform as a medical influencer to advocate the reopening of schools at the height of the COVID pandemic, even if that meant that potentially hundreds more people, including children, had to die.
Well, first, we need our mojo back. Let's start with things that are really critical to the nation, where we think we might be able to open without getting into a lot of trouble. I tell you, schools are a very appetizing opportunity. I just saw a nice piece in The Lancet arguing that the opening of schools may only cost us 2 to 3% in terms of total mortality.
Well, what's the harm in killing 2 to 3% more people if it means getting our mojo back? And here's another example, again from today. ABC News is now reporting, according to multiple sources, that Trump is considering nominating Russell Vought, the architect of Project 2025, for a cabinet-level position. NBC News has not independently verified that reporting, but remember that Donald Trump spent the last 6 months insisting that he had nothing to do with Project 2025. So yes, flooding the zone is the playbook here, and now it is being run in a way that we have literally never seen before. So if this is the new normal, if this is just the way it's going to be now, how do Democrats, how does the media, how should the public stay focused on what is really happening? Joining me now are Dan Pfeiffer, co-host of Pod Save America and former White House senior advisor to President Obama, and Claire McCaskill, former senator from Missouri and current MSNBC political analyst. Dan and Claire, thank you both for being here tonight. Claire, let me just start with you in terms of how it is drinking from a fire hose, quite literally, something we, became adept at in 2016. But this feels like it's a different order of magnitude. And I wonder how you are picking and choosing where to focus both your concern and rage.
Well, that's hard. I feel like I'm halfway between, in a fetal position, depressed and enraged, like every 10 minutes. It's a hell of a roller coaster ride right now. But let me just say this. On these nominees, every senator will have to cast a vote. First, many of them will have to cast votes in committee. And there will be a hearing. And the Democratic senators will have a lot of things to talk about in those hearings. And hopefully they get covered widely by all stripes of media, not just on our network, but on Fox News and on some of the other really right-wing disinformation centers. And hopefully Americans see why these people are completely unqualified. And all these senators, Alex, remember, a bunch of these senators know that this was not a landslide. The Republican senator didn't win in Wisconsin. The Republican Senate candidate didn't win in Nevada. The Republican Senate candidate didn't win in Arizona. The Republican Senate candidate, even though he had a lot of money and was a popular former Republican governor, didn't win in Maryland. There were a lot of states where the Republicans in the Senate were reminded that this is not a country that is lopsided in favor of unqualified nominees for important, complex government jobs. And I think that Trump may be surprised because you only have to have 4 on any of these folks. You only have to have 4. And if you just take the people who aren't running again, you get to 4.
Dan, to that end, I wonder if you think, I understand the desire to sort of sift through the wreckage and say, to debate whether Trump has a mandate or not. But I also think it's clear that certain lines of criticism or coverage have not resonated the way that I think perhaps a lot of people who are tethered to Earth One and the truth would have liked them to. And I wonder if you think that particularly Democrats in the Senate who are going to be part of this confirmation process should adopt a different strategy when thinking about what to focus on with these potential cabinet picks.
I don't know if it's a different strategy. We have a very robust case to make against all of them. I think the thing we have to be careful about as Democrats, and something we've all fell into in 2017 when Trump was elected, is we become the defenders of the status quo, the defenders of the institution. And I think what we can do here is we can acknowledge that institutions, government need to be reformed, but they should not be changed in the way that Donald Trump is proposing, right? And I think we need we can make the case against RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard and Matt Gaetz and all that, and those are very strong cases to make, trust me. But there's a broader case here about what Trump is doing. It is pure cronyism and corruption. He is putting in place people who are going to serve his interest, not the nation's interest. And I think that is an argument that could resonate. Because we got a whole bunch of people who voted for Trump who don't like him and don't agree with him, and they voted for 2 reasons: that he was going to focus on lowering their costs and he was going to bring change to government. This isn't the change they voted for, so that's the case we should make.
Claire, what do you think about that argument? Just as far as it concerns people like Tom Tillis, people who are up for re-election, people who may be the pivot points here. Do you think that that argument works? That this is about a sort of one-man selfish, self-serving agenda? Is it about our national interest? Is it about sexual assault allegations? I mean, what do you think is most resonant in terms of your former Republican colleagues in the Senate?
Well, I think the Democrats, I think Dan's right in terms of messaging. The Democrats need to be disciplined about presenting these candidates not just as potentially guilty of sexual assault and not as, that they are really wholly unqualified, but they are part of a Trump agenda to do things that Americans don't want. And so pinning down some of these folks about, well, where would 2/3 of the workforce that you're going to be in charge of, where would you cut those 2/3? Because that's what Musk has said they're going to do. They're going to cut 2/3 of the employees. Well, I would like Dr. Oz, who, with a straight face told me that it was okay for him to say that acai berries were a miracle in a bottle and would cut your fat and all that silliness that he did on his show. I'd like him to explain to the American people how you cut 2/3 of the people that process Medicare payments, or how you cut 2/3 of the people that administer health care in this country in terms of getting payments out that help Americans. I think focusing on the impact it will have on the American people is going to be much more effective. But remember why these guys were chosen, not just to further Trump's ego and his idea that this is all about him, but the other reason they were chosen is they're good performative politicians. They're going to do performance. They're going to do sound bites. They're going to be telegenic. These are not people that are qualified to run anything. I mean, most of these folks have never run anything in their lives, much less a really sprawling, complex organization that has to deliver essential services to the American people who pay for them.
It seems, Dan, that like Claire's point about the qualifications issue is most convincingly used by Democrats if it's, towards a specific end. How is Mehmet Oz going to manage CMS? What exactly is Pete Hegseth going to do in terms of running the giant sprawling bureaucracy that is the U.S. military? I wonder if what issues in particular you think are most easily brought to the fore by Democrats that will have resonance not just with Republican senators, but with the American public. We had like a whole election play out, and it seems like the Harris ticket really tried to hit on those issues, a lot of like sort of nonpartisan issues that people care about, and to some degree that just didn't resonate at all. So I wonder what the lesson is from that in terms of the issues specifically that need to be focused on in these coming confirmation processes.
I think it's worth separating the effort to convince Republican senators to vote against them with the broader effort to convince the public that the MAGA extremist Republican Party cannot be allowed to govern in 26, 28, and onward. Because there's going to be specific arguments that are going to work for Thom Tillis, just around RFK Jr. with some of these Republican senators. We've already seen Mike Pence come out and attack RFK Jr. for being having supported abortion access in his career. And so there are going to be specific strategies there. We should do everything we possibly can to defeat these candidates. But then there's the broader story we want to tell. And I think the part we have to be careful on is a lot of voters, particularly the ones who decided this election, the ones who went from Biden to Trump, the ones who came into the process for the first time to vote for Trump, they are very cynical about government. They're very cynical about politicians. They're very distrustful of institutions. And if our answer is for all these people is they are not expert enough, they are not from Washington enough to do these jobs, that is going to fall by the wayside. So I think we have to be specific about the ways in which these individual appointments are going to affect people's lives, right? I think what Senator McCaskill hit on with Dr. Oz and Medicare and Medicaid is very important. Right? You're going to put someone in who is a known grifter to run the most important and most popular program in the American government. For Matt Gaetz, he is there not to protect us from crime, right? To stop terrorism, to stop financial fraud and all the other things the Department of Justice does. He is there to investigate who Donald Trump wants investigated, and as importantly, not investigate who Donald Trump doesn't want investigated. And so making this a little more specific about how it affects people's lives, I think is going to be better than their unqualified argument, although that may work with Republican senators for sure.
It's too complicated. I get what you're saying, Dan. It's like the argument for Thom Tillis is totally separate and apart from the argument towards the American public. But I think Dan hits on something really important, Claire, which is the idea, and we talked with Ben Rhodes about this in the wake of the election, that Democrats have been forced into the position of defending institutions and bureaucracies. And in a moment of where the American public is desirous of change or disruption, that's not a good place to be. First of all, do you agree with that? And do you think that that sort of careful choreography of defending democracy and transparency and rule of law can exist separate and apart from a more strident defense of bureaucracies and institutions that people have lost faith in?
Yeah, I agree with Dan. This should not be about the status quo in government is what we're here to protect. Because no Americans are going to go, oh, yeah, we love the status quo in government. It's perfect. Nothing's ever wrong. I never am put on hold. And I never have to worry about getting the answer to my question. I mean, it's like asking people, do they love going to the DMV, right? So it is really not a good idea to take the position that these people are going to hurt the status quo. What these people are going to do is hurt you. They are going to hurt your life because they are planning on doing things that you don't agree with. And that's the challenge of the Senate. Now, the specific qualifications on specific issues will speak to certain senators, and that will occur. That kind of lobbying will occur. Those senators will learn things about these folks and their backgrounds that they already know things. I mean, I guarantee you there's already votes to not confirm Matt Gaetz. So, but this really is about Chuck Schumer and the Democratic caucus having the discipline of messaging. This isn't about defending government. This is about defending the American people.
Dan Pfeiffer and Claire McCaskill answering the hard questions. Thank you guys for taking the time tonight. I appreciate it. Coming up, the president-elect attends a SpaceX rocket launch with the man who has already received billions of dollars in government contracts and stands to gain a whole lot more in a second Trump administration. But first, Trump has started receiving intelligence briefings again, despite being indicted on 40 counts of mishandling classified intelligence. What could go wrong? Congressman Jason Crow, a member of the House Intelligence Committee, joins me to discuss coming up next. Today, we learned that President-elect Trump is now receiving intelligence briefings once again. Now, we don't know the specifics of those briefings, but it's highly likely that they involve classified material. Remember the last time Donald Trump had regular access to classified information? Remember that? Okay, well, he revealed the capability of U.S. spy satellites by publicly tweeting out a photo of an Iranian missile launch site. He shared classified intelligence gathered by a foreign ally with Russian officials in the Oval Office. And, of course, he was indicted on 40 federal criminal counts related to the mishandling of classified documents after he left office. Remember all that? We also learned that Trump's team is continuing to opt out of the official transition process in ways that jeopardize national security. The Washington Post reports that in calls with foreign heads of state, Trump has cut out the State Department, its secure lines, and its official interpreters. As his team considers hundreds of potential appointees for key jobs, Trump has also so far declined to let the FBI check for potential red flags and security threats to guard against espionage, instead relying on private campaign lawyers for some appointees and doing no vetting at all for others. Joining me now is Congressman Jason Crow, Democrat of Colorado, who serves on the House Intelligence and Foreign Relations Committees. Congressman Crow, thank you for being here. We just rattled off a list of a litany of distressing reporting about this Trump transition. And I wonder, as someone who sits on the committees that you do, what alarms you the most about what we're hearing?
Well, Alex, it's kind of hard to really decide where to start here, right? There's the issues of process. You kind of outlined some processes and procedures, security checks and protocol. And these aren't put in place just for fun, right? Those are put in place to protect against spies, to protect against espionage, to protect the transfer and the dissemination of really critical information that, isn't going to just be left somewhere. But we have to understand that there are adversaries actively trying to get this stuff, trying to penetrate our cybersecurity systems every day. So protecting this and having these processes in place is meant to protect the American people, and it's meant to protect our intelligence officers and our servicemen and women who are serving in dangerous places, which that information could put them in a compromising position. So, yes, certainly the process is flawed, but as we all well know, the fundamentals of these nominees and their very policies themselves are disturbing as well.
Can I just follow on that? I mean, would you assume that foreign adversaries are already trying to listen in on these phone calls that Trump is having with world leaders, given that he's not using secure lines, he's not engaging in any of the security protocols that normally exist?
Well, I don't have to assume that. I know that to be true, right? Like, listen, as we sit here right now having this conversation, we have thousands of intelligence officers around the globe in very dangerous situations, putting themselves at risk to collect information or to protect information, to prevent attacks against the American people, to prevent our financial systems from being breached. We have servicemen and women around the globe in dangerous places, protecting American citizens, protecting our assets, right? This is a daily, this is an hourly occurrence, right? This is an active, dynamic situation. So sitting back even a day or two, letting our guard down, poses substantial risk. And when you look at the people that he has nominated, people like Tulsi Gabbard and others who not only are incompetent and don't have the experience to do this, but I actually question their very loyalties in some cases. Tulsi Gabbard, for example, has a very long history of showing affinity for dictators and autocrats, of being irresponsible with Russian propaganda. And you know, when I say irresponsible, that's actually putting it generously for actually somebody who has purposely perpetuated that propaganda. It's a very dangerous time here.
Well, I mean, and I was going to ask you about Tulsi Gabbard, who would lead, I believe it's 18 intelligence agencies. What about Pete Hegseth, who is Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense? I mean, there are questions about his support for soldiers accused of war crimes. There are his own sexual assault. There's an NDA that he signed in the wake of some claims by a woman. That is an ongoing situation on the Hill. What concerns you about his nomination?
The lack of experience and simply that he was nominated because he will be loyal to Donald Trump. Listen, in your prior segment, when you were talking to Dan and Claire, you actually made a really interesting point about Democrats being put in a position of defending agencies and departments. That's actually not what we're doing. We're not defending agencies and departments. What we're trying to do is ensure that government works to protect Americans, that it works to serve Americans. And that can take the form of making sure that fraud, waste, and abuse or government inefficiency is addressed in Capitol Hill. But in these instances, it takes the form of making sure that nominees are not put into positions to dismantle important agencies and functions, to line the pockets of cronies or supporters of Donald Trump, or even worse, to weaponize those agencies against Donald Trump's opponents, which very clearly is the case with Matt Gaetz, for example. So it is the same thing we're doing. We are working to ensure that government works for Americans, not for individuals, not for donors.
Can I follow up on that, though? Because I think that there's probably a finer line than there should be separating the idea of Democrats who want to ensure the integrity of institutions and the notion of just being a blanket defender of bureaucracy. And I say that because the Overton window has shifted so much that unless you're there to burn it all down, you're somehow part of the deep state. And I wonder if you think that job of Democrats defending the institutions of democracy and the guardrails that protect our representative democracy is going to be a lot harder in Trump 2.0 when you maybe have people like Matt Gaetz at the Department of Justice and Tulsi Gabbard at the Office of National Intelligence. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about?
Yeah, people talk a lot about defending institutions, defending the guardrails, but defending the institution and the guardrails is not the end, right? That is not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to protect Americans and ensure that government serves them, right? That's the goal. These guardrails, these institutions are in furtherance of that goal, right? So whenever we talk about, defending the rules-based international order, defending guardrails, defending institutions, there's a lot of people who are like, well, why? In furtherance of what end? So it's really important that when we talk about this, we're talking about what it is we're trying to achieve and how it serves Americans and the people in my district in Colorado, the families, how their lives are impacted by, clean food, clean water, aviation inspectors, rail line inspectors, intelligence officers that are thwarting attacks against Americans. That is the goal, and that's the way we need to talk about it, and that's the way that we need to pursue policy and oversight.
Greater specificity. Congressman Jason Crow, thank you so much for your perspective on this. It's really great to hear from a sitting member of Congress about the road ahead. I appreciate your time tonight, sir.
Thank you.
Coming up, the coziness between Donald Trump and Elon Musk was on full display today at SpaceX's latest rocket launch. How much more money, power, and influence can one man have? That is next.
Most likely it's going to happen at our Brownsville location because we got a lot of land with nobody around. So if it blows up, it's cool.
That was Elon Musk, the world's richest man and owner of the commercial aerospace company SpaceX, back in 2018, talking about SpaceX's launch site in Boca Chica, Texas, near Brownsville. That spot was chosen by SpaceX for two reasons. Number one, it is one of the southernmost points in the continental United States. Number two, it is just a teeny tiny strip of private property surrounded almost entirely by government-owned land. And that's why Elon Musk thought if stuff blows up, it's cool. And stuff has certainly blown up over and over and over again. But here's the thing about Boca Chica, Texas. Even though there are not a ton of people nearby, that does not mean it is empty. The government-owned land that surrounds SpaceX's Boca Chica launch site is made up of state parks and beaches and national wildlife refuges. The area is home to everything from protected bird habitats to a breeding ground for the world's most endangered species of sea turtle. To give you a sense of the kind of damage these rocket launches can have, here is the New York Times description of a successful launch earlier this summer. Again, this is a successful launch, no explosions involved. 2 hours after the launch, a team from SpaceX, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and a conservation group began canvassing the fragile migratory bird habitat surrounding the launch site. The impact was obvious. The launch had unleashed an enormous burst of mud, stones, and fiery debris across the public lands encircling Mr. Musk's $3 billion space compound. Chunks of sheet metal and insulation were strewn across the sand flats on one side of a state park. Elsewhere, a small fire had ignited, leaving a charred patch of park grassland, remnants from the blast-off that burned 7.5 million pounds of fuel. Most disturbing to one member of the entourage was the yellow smear on the soil in the same spot that a bird's nest lay the day before. None of the 9 nests recorded by the nonprofit Coastal Bend Bays and Estuaries program before the launch had survived intact. Egg yolk now stained the ground. And that was a successful launch. For years now, SpaceX has been at odds with government agencies like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Department of the Interior and the EPA over the impact of SpaceX's Boca Chica launch pad. Today, Elon Musk was joined in Boca Chica for SpaceX's latest launch, and he was joined by President-elect Trump himself. Now, just last week, Trump tapped Musk to run what he's calling the Department of Government Efficiency. The idea there is that Musk would be given a broad remit to suggest cuts to federal agencies as Musk sees fit. Agencies like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Department of the Interior and the EPA. Familiar agencies, if you're Elon Musk. And the cherry on top is that because Musk would just be an advisor to Donald Trump and not an actual government employee, Musk wouldn't have to be confirmed by the Senate, nor would he have to divest from any of the companies overseen by the agencies that Elon Musk would now be overseeing. And SpaceX's flights with the federal government in Boca Chica are really just the tip of the iceberg here. Elon Musk's companies have been targeted in more than 20 recent investigations or reviews by federal regulators. And now Elon Musk has the president's ear. Trump is literally attending Elon Musk's rocket launches and potentially giving him free rein to cut the very government agencies that Elon Musk has problems with. Not to mention all of the money Musk stands to make on government contracts alone. We'll get into that and much more coming up next. Following Donald Trump's election win, the world's 10 wealthiest billionaires got a record $64 billion richer, according to Bloomberg's daily ranking. The man who gained the most was already the world's richest person, Elon Musk. Overnight, Musk's wealth increased by a staggering $26.5 billion. And that could just be the first installment. As co-chair of Trump's so-called Department of Government Efficiency, which by all indications, won't be an actual governmental department, but more of an outside advisory committee. Musk could have unprecedented power over how the federal government functions and operates, including how federal contracts operate, which is not a bad place to be if you're Elon Musk. And two of your companies have received over $15 billion in taxpayer money, including for programs like SpaceX, a relationship that, by the looks of it today, may only get cozier. Joining me now is Teddy Schleifer, reporter for the New York Times, who has been covering campaign finance and the influence of billionaires in American politics. Teddy, thank you so much for being here. I've been eager to have this conversation with you, and each day brings a new data point about the Musk-Trump relationship. First of all, I was struck by the attendance of the president-elect at a SpaceX launch and the tweets that Trump sent out. I'm heading to the great state of Texas to watch the launch of the largest object ever to be elevated, not only to space, but simply by lifting off the ground. Good luck to Elon Musk and the great patriots involved in this incredible project. Now, presidents having admiration for space programs is not a new thing, but the relationship between SpaceX and the federal government seems to be a particular one. Can you talk more about that and how much money is being exchanged there?
Sure. Look, I mean, even if Kamala Harris had won, I think it's true that Elon Musk would have a big role in American space policy. I mean, he runs kind of the largest private space company in the United States, and I think it's fair to think that he would always play a big role in American space policy. But clearly, Trump is enamored by the role that Musk is playing right now. And, you can see it on the screen right now. He's having a lot of fun. He's getting to see up close how space policy works. You get to see a rocket launch from people I've talked with in Trump's orbit. He clearly is enjoying the fact that he gets to see an industry he knows nothing about, right? Trump doesn't really know anything about space policy. He knows about real estate. He knows about he knows a little bit about manufacturing. But I think part of the reason why Trump and Musk get along so well right now is because Trump is learning. He's learning about this industry. He's seeing rockets, big, billows of smoke and fire. I mean, he's having fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easily understandable, a giant rocket going into space. What's less discussed is the fact that I think SpaceX has received at least $15.4 billion in federal contracts across 9 cabinet agencies and 3 independent federal agencies. The charmingly cozy the cozy relationship between these two men certainly has to be a good thing for Elon Musk, just in terms of continuing to keep that money flowing. But then there's like the issue of Tesla, which Musk obviously has a vested interest in. Last year, I think Tesla earned $1.79 billion from carbon credits. This seems like a little bit of a more complicated relationship, given the climate denialism that characterizes much of the GOP. What does your reporting tell you about the expectations going into that vis-a-vis, Trump and his climate change skeptic at the EPA, potentially, and generally the Republican posture on climate and Musk's, vested interest in climate technology?
Yeah, Alex, you would think for a minute that, or you forget for a minute that Elon Musk is somebody who used to be embraced by liberals, right? I mean, driving a Tesla was this card-carrying element of being a proud Democrat. Elon really never talks about climate really much at all anymore. If you look at his Twitter feed and what he says publicly, he hasn't really been asked to square kind of his policy on climate change with his support for Trump. The issues that Elon seems to care about are immigration, it's crime. I would love to have a great answer to your question, but Elon hasn't really been confronted by this himself. And, it makes you wonder, does Trump really know much about kind of Elon's traditional hawkishness on climate issues? And it makes you wonder whether Elon himself cares about that issue. During the Trump presidency, the first time, Elon Musk was, apoplectic about America pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords. That was, all of, 7 or 8 years ago now. So maybe things have changed, and certainly Elon's politics have changed. But you raise a good point, which is it is unclear that issue that animated Elon to get involved with, electric vehicles and, certainly made a big impact on the entire industry. It's unclear if that issue even registers for him anymore.
Yeah, well, and then certainly it says that the potential hope that he might do something to sway Trump on climate change seems like a far-fetched idea indeed. I wonder, though, when we talk about Musk's various business interests here. It seems like the regulatory state is something he is after. He now is going to be co-chairing this Department on Government Efficiency, DOGE. It's not an official, cabinet level agency. It's outside of the government. But I wonder what you think. There's a various talk about Republicans tinkering, or the Trump administration tinkering with the law to take up Elon's recommendations more wholeheartedly, to take more, for the White House to take more control of the purse strings that is normally a power vested with Congress. Do you expect Elon Musk to literally use this agency to benefit himself and his bottom line directly and explicitly, given what we know about his war on the deep state?
Look, I mean, whenever you have a businessman, especially with as many businesses that Elon Musk has, enter government, like there are conflicts of interest. That's inevitable. Conflicts of interest are managed all the time. It is not, I don't really buy the idea that this is impossible to manage. I think what's challenging with this particular department that Elon is proposing on setting up, or that Trump is proposing on setting up, is that this is a government body, or it seems to be a government body that's going to be existing outside of the normal kind of disclosure regime. It's unclear if these conflicts are even going to be public. That's a big difference from, say, the CEO of Goldman Sachs going to be Secretary of the Treasury. That's a well-worn path in the revolving door of kind of American capitalism. Here, I think disclosure is going to be really important. And I frankly think just like facts about what this government body is even going to do are really important. And we don't have either of those right now. And, look, I think that with Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, they can play a role in federal government and budget cutting while also having these businesses that they're running. But we need more information, frankly, about how exactly this is going to be structured so the conflicts can be managed, which can be done.
All right. I'm going to say that's a cautiously optimistic note you're sounding, Teddy Schleifer, about DOGE and Musk.
Only November. Yeah.
I'm pessimistic for the record, but I agree. Yeah. We need more information, Teddy Schleifer from the New York Times. Thanks for your time tonight.